There was a sustained effort, an attempt to politically interfere with my discretion as the Attorney General of Canada. I resigned from Cabinet because I did not have confidence to sit around the table, the Cabinet table. That's why I resigned.
Dramatic testimony from Jody Wilson-Raybould has escalated the SNC-Lavalin controversy even further. The Prime Minister continues to defend his actions after the former Attorney General accused him, his top aides and cabinet officials of repeatedly pressuring her to intervene in the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. The opposition says Justin Trudeau needs to resign.
Justin Trudeau simply cannot continue to govern this country now that Canadians know what he has done.
The Conservatives, they're the ones calling for the Prime Minister to resign, have also formally requested that the RCMP launch a criminal investigation. So who's telling the truth, Wilson-Raybould or the Prime Minister? Justin Trudeau says that's up to the Ethics Commissioner to decide.
There were many and broad conversations about the importance of defending jobs, not just in Quebec, but right across the country. While political parties and various people are making or trying to draw a lot of attention to this issue, there is a process, both at the Justice Committee and indeed at the Ethics Commissioner, that will make a determination on what actually happened here.
And we are just receiving an update from the Justice Committee, which has decided to invite 3 more witnesses to testify before it. We're learning that those witnesses include Mr. Jerry Butts, the former Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister. He actually sent a letter to the chair of the committee asking to testify. The committee is now inviting him. They're also inviting Nathalie Drouin, who is the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice, and Michael Wernick, whom we heard from last week, the clerk of the Privy Council, who testified again, I believe it was last Thursday. He's being invited to testify again. We'll look to see if we can confirm the dates that'll happen, and we'll bring you those updates as they occur throughout the show. But just to let you know, Michael Wernick, Jerry Butts, and Nathalie Drouin have been invited by the Justice Committee to testify before them. Let's get into how members of Cabinet are reacting to this controversy, though, and what happens now with Liberal MP Jody Wilson-Raybould. Does she stay in caucus, for example? Carla Qualtrough is the Minister of Public Works and Government Services, and she joins me now. Hi, Minister Qualtrough. Nice to see you. Me. Thank you very much for coming in. Do you believe Jody Wilson-Raybould when she says she was inappropriately pressured?
Well, a couple of things. So yesterday we heard about multiple conversations that happened between the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and the Prime Minister's office. And we also heard the Prime Minister say that his characterization of what went down in those meetings are different. The former AG gave a fulsome version of what she says happens, and I don't think anyone is denying that those meetings happened. I know Jody Wilson-Raybould to be a very thoughtful, direct, considered person in the way that she characterizes things, but I also know the Prime Minister to be a very thoughtful, direct person as well. So that's where we are.
Does that mean that you don't know who to believe?
Well, it's not a matter of knowing who to believe. I think for me, it's more a matter of thinking that 2 people can go into a conversation and have different takeaways.
Really? And I'm asked because it's not just one conversation, right? And also I would highlight that you said that the Prime Minister said he disagrees with her characterization, which is true. He also admitted he hadn't listened to the entire testimony. I mean, it's one thing to say, in general, I disagree that the actions were inappropriate, but she had a very meticulously laid out body of evidence to support her claim. And he didn't address those specific allegations.
Yeah, well, can I tell you what I was looking for in her testimony yesterday as a cabinet minister and as an MP and as a Canadian, I guess, is I wanted to hear if she felt that she had been directly told to interfere. And she said she hadn't, that she had been clearly told it was her decision to make. And I wanted to hear, as a lawyer, I guess, if she thought that there had been any illegal action. And again, she was very clear that there had been, those were the lines that I was looking to see if were crossed.
So that's the bar for you?
That was the bar for me,
So
yes.
Inappropriate is okay?
Well, I don't think inappropriate is ever okay, but I can tell you that there are robust conversations that happen between all of us and the Prime Minister and his office. There are conversations that happen between my Chief of Staff and the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister. And is it unnormal for things to get... I can't even describe it. These are such tough files, right? You're talking to the minister responsible for Phoenix, responsible for shipbuilding. These conversations can be very different.
But she was the Attorney General, right? And the specific allegation that she made was that, for example, in a meeting with the Prime Minister, he brought up jobs, and she said, okay, Jobs are part of the discussion, an appropriate discussion. But then he brought up the Quebec election and said that he was an MP in Quebec. She viewed that as a partisan consideration and one that does not befit the Attorney General. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, I could see that she would see it that way.
I just want to be clear, though. Does that mean that you think that's inappropriate of the Prime Minister to do?
I wasn't there. I'm very hesitant to kind of weigh in on a conversation that I wasn't a part of. And quite frankly, I think there's more to be heard about all these different meetings between different people, and some of them were third party. And I respect the Attorney General's absolute ability to meticulously chronologize these things. I know her to be a very thorough, meticulous person. But I wasn't there, so I'm not weighing in.
The Prime Minister keeps saying that he and your government and other members of your government say it as well, are standing up for jobs. At what cost? How far are you willing to go to stand up for those jobs?
Well, here's how I see it, if you want to know how I would see this. And I actually have had the benefit of being very involved within my own portfolio in our whole corporate wrongdoing enhancements, both on the integrity regime and on the DPA side. I think it's really important when we're making these decisions that we understand the implications for third parties, like innocent third parties, like workers, like pensioners, like shareholders. You know, these are decisions when we make them that impact lives in a very real way. And I think it's completely appropriate. I would go so far in some of these situations as saying incumbent upon us to consider those things.
Does the end justify the means, though?
The end never justifies the means. But I don't think that it was inappropriate for the Prime Minister and his staff to monitor what was going on in this very controversial, high-profile situation.
But based on her testimony, they weren't just monitoring her. They were saying, find a solution. And when she said no, they said, let's hire outside legal counsel. We can provide cover. This is about the Quebec election, too. It wasn't just, let's think about jobs.
It was, let's think about a lot of things. And again, like I said, I'm not going to weigh in, but I think that past the end of September, there was an ongoing obligation on the Attorney General, and I quite frankly think that obligation is ongoing. It's ongoing now, to be open to the situation having changed with respect to her decision or his decision, whoever it is.
What changed about the situation?
Well, I'm just saying it's completely appropriate for someone to have circled back and said, are you still of this opinion? Have you considered these things? There could have been situational changes from the kind of bottom up, from the criminal case itself, and there could have been situational changes from the top down. So different implications.
If you were Attorney General, though, and you heard somebody raise the specter of electoral chances in Quebec, would you feel like that is a valid thing to consider?
If I were Attorney General and I thought that I had been unduly or inappropriately pressured, and I would say this as in my current role as Cabinet Minister as well, I think there were a number of avenues of recourses that one can pursue. Certainly going to your boss and saying, I am being inappropriately pressured.
Even if you feel like the boss is one of the people doing that to you?
Well, yes. I mean, you have to take that effort. You have to at least do that, hoping that, reason will prevail. And then there's also the option of resigning. Well,
she did eventually resign. And she also said that she took the Prime Minister at his word when he said that she wasn't demoted because of SNC. Right. And she also did raise, she at many junctures, according to her testimony, she did say, this isn't appropriate.
Right, and I know there were a number of meetings, but again, I can tell you, we have these really high-pressure meetings on really tough files all the time.
One of your BC Caucus colleagues today, Jody Sidhu, had to apologize for saying that Ms. Wilson-Raybould wasn't a team player, that her father or someone else might be pulling her strings, and that she couldn't handle the stress. Is that a widespread feeling in Caucus?
I think that was a completely inappropriate thing to say. He apologized, but the damage was done, and it was just, there's been no tolerance for that kind of comment.
Do you think,
and I don't think that is wide. I can guarantee you that is not a widely held view.
Do you think that Ms. Wilson-Raybould should remain in Caucus?
I would like to think that if Jody Wilson-Raybould continues to kind of share the vision for our country of the Liberal Party and continues to share our values and wants to keep pursuing the things that are important to us as Liberals, that she should stay in Caucus.
What does that mean, though? Like those are kind of big tent things.
But that would be the things that I would take if I still believed in the leader, if I still believed in the platform.
So she would still need to have confidence in the Prime Minister, you believe, to stay in Caucus.
Yes, and I think and also there's the other side of this. I think the leader has a conversation that he has to have with a member of Caucus, and other Caucus members have to weigh in. I don't think this is a matter of simply somebody snapping their fingers and it happens.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Minister Qualtrough. I appreciate your time. As we mentioned earlier, BC Liberal MP Jati Sidhu apologized today for comments he made to Abbotsford News reporter Tyler Olson. Olson tweeted that Sidhu said Jody Wilson-Raybould is not a team player and speculated whether her father or somebody else was pulling the strings. He reportedly said, "The way she's acting, I think she couldn't handle the stress." Sidhu rose in the House today after his comments were raised in question period. Take a listen.
Apologize without reservation to the member of Vancouver-Granville. My comments were inappropriate, whether inside or outside this House. It is incumbent on all of us to treat each other with respect at all times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The official opposition is calling for the Prime Minister to resign after his former Attorney General lodged some stunning allegations during yesterday's nearly 4-hour testimony. Jody Wilson-Raybould says Justin Trudeau is among 11 people who over 4 months pressured her to interfere in the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. Here's some of what the opposition had to say on Parliament Hill today.
It was very disturbing testimony, very credible testimony, but it painted a very ugly picture of this Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office.
Jody Wilson-Raybould was entirely credible, entirely impressive. She has a clear legal mind, and she's a woman of great integrity.
The testimony was astonishing. She talked about a sustained campaign of political interference involving 20 calls and meetings.
It is just telling us what the Liberals and the Conservatives are ready to do to be sure that they will buy votes in Quebec.
Then the Prime Minister had the audacity to tell Canadians he rejected this damning and detailed testimony and then admitted that he hadn't actually listened to it all. Talk about arrogance. Talk about tone deaf.
He stands accused of political interference in a criminal case. And in one of those meetings, the clerk of the Privy Council told the former Attorney General that this wasn't about jobs. This was about a shareholder meeting that was happening next Thursday, and that there was an election in Quebec.
It is not the role of the clerk of the Privy Council to act as the personal goon of the Prime Minister. At the very least, will they call on Michael Wernick to step down today?
But it may rise to the level of obstruction of justice, which is why we need the RCMP to launch an immediate investigation.
The Prime Minister says he and his office respected the rule of law. Jody Wilson-Raybould, meanwhile, says while the actions may not have been illegal, she calls them inappropriate. So is there enough here for the RCMP to investigate? Kenneth Jewell is a lawyer at Gardner Roberts LLP and an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law and Osgoode Hall Law School. He appeared before the Justice Committee earlier this week. Hi, Professor Jewell. Nice to see you. Thank you for your time.
Hi. It's a pleasure.
Did you hear anything yesterday in Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony that would give you concern or rise to the level of criminality?
Okay, so when you say criminality, that is a very high level. I did not hear anything yesterday that rose to the level of criminality. In fact, I believe Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould said herself that she did not think things that had occurred were illegal, although she did say she thought they were inappropriate. So I didn't hear anything yesterday that rose to that level.
What did you think of the comments that she made, the description she gave of what constituted inappropriate behavior from her perspective?
So one of the concerns that I have as a lawyer and as a professor is some of the comments that she gave with respect to what was said about the legal process. And let me just give you an example. She talked about the text message that her chief of staff had relayed to her. She talked about the fact that, if this is true, that Jerry Butts had said that he didn't like the DPP legislation. He didn't like the law. And she said that, or relayed the fact that Katie Telford had said, and I'm going to quote because I want to get the words right, she said, "We don't want to debate legalities anymore. We aren't lawyers, but there has to be some solution here." So I find that concerning, and I think that was part of where Ms. Wilson-Raybould was going yesterday with respect to how she felt.
What did you think of her testimony when you heard it?
Well, it'll be obviously for the Justice Committee to evaluate that. I'm not a judge, but I thought certainly she was very well prepared. She seemed sincere. And there were some things, though, that she didn't talk about, and I want to talk about about that, if you'll allow me.
Of course, of course. Are you talking specifically of the period after she was Attorney General?
No, that too, but let me start with this, because and it'll dovetail with my own testimony. So when I testified before the committee, one of the things that I talked about was Section F, the purpose section of the legislation, which talks about reducing negative impact for employees, customers, and pensioners who were not guilty or did not engage in wrongdoing. She was asked yesterday by Randy Boissonneau about that section. And she said that, we're treading into dangerous territory here, and then she wouldn't talk about that. Now, to my mind, that leaves some unanswered questions, because there was a cabinet waiver. I understand if the conversations related to her discussions with the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions. That was privileged. But with respect to the cabinet, there was a waiver. So what does it mean? Does it mean that there were no discussions with the cabinet and Ms. Wilson-Raybould about Section F? Were there any discussions? And also, there was no discussion about the section in the Act which says there are factors why not to consider, such as the national economic concern. So I think this is just the beginning of this story. We need to hear, in my view, more information from other people and maybe have her recalled with respect to this issue, because I don't understand why she would say we're treading into dangerous territory if there was a cabinet waiver, unless there was no discussion at all about that. So it's an unanswered question.
Can I ask you also about, from your perspective, there was so much conversation about what is okay to talk about with the Attorney General when you're talking about, for example, this specific matter. She made it clear that she did not find a discussion oriented on policy and jobs to be inappropriate. But when, for example, the idea of the Quebec election and the fact that the Prime Minister is an MP in Quebec was brought up, that would be inappropriate. In a case like this, from your perspective, what is appropriate and inappropriate to talk about with the Attorney General?
So I think you have to go back and look at this legislation, which is a unique type of legislation called remediation agreements. And you also have to keep in mind that this was very new legislation. It had been just passed, and in fact, it was only taking a force as of September 21st, and these discussions were happening around September 4th and then the 16th and 17th. So you have to look at the provisions, all right? You have to look at the fact that you can consider things like jobs and impact on people not guilty of wrongdoing. That sets it apart from your ordinary criminal case. Now, having said that, and the Law Reform Commission said this a long time ago, and I worked there a long time ago, you have to draw a line between partisan and nonpartisan type of factors. Partisan factors are typically things like winning an election. But there are nonpartisan factors, like, for example, the impact on pensioners and employees and innocent people, that would be quite appropriate, in my view, to speak about, because it's actually referred to in the legislation. And I think that's the dividing line, and it's important to ground ourselves and go back to the legislation and look at the factors. There are 6 purpose factors, 9 factors to consider. And what I was a bit disappointed about yesterday was I didn't hear anybody talking about that. So my hope is there'll be more discussion about the remediation agreement, the legislation, and this mix of partisan, nonpartisan factors. But you've got to ground yourself in the legislation itself.
Sounds like we will hear more testimony from more witnesses, so hoping for that as well. Thank you so much, Professor Jewell. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Many of Justin Trudeau's cabinet ministers and caucus members spoke up today, either in his defense or to reflect on Wilson-Raybould's testimony. Have a listen.
She's had a chance to provide her reality. And I think it's a testament to the Prime Minister that the cabinet confidentiality and other constraints were waived, so that she did have a chance to present her reality.
I didn't have the opportunity to listen to her testimony. I was in a cabinet meeting, but I did review it, and Jody Wilson-Raybould has her opinion.
I believe that she spoke as she said she wanted to do, her truth. Having said that, I am very clearly of the view that the Prime Minister would never apply improper pressure.
I think we had a version of the truth that was given by the current Attorney General. It was given also by the Deputy Attorney General. It was given by the Clerk of the Privy Council. They gave their version of the truth. She gave her version of the truth, and she's named many other people. I think they have a right to have their chance to tell their story as well.
I think the prudent approach, and I think Canadians would think that we should not jump to any conclusion. We should take the time to listen to the other witnesses, who I'm sure would have their perception and their views about what really happened.
And we've just learned the Justice Committee has invited 3 witnesses to testify on this case. 2 of them have actually already appeared. Michael Wernick, Clerk of the Privy Council, and Nathalie Drouin, Deputy Minister of Justice, are being asked to return for more questions. And Justin Trudeau's former top aide, Jerry Butts, has been invited to testify next Wednesday. Not on the list, Jessica Prince, the Chief of Staff to Jody Wilson-Raybould, who of course was brought up many times during her testimony yesterday.